If I were to ask you how a story about a princess were to end, you'd probably answer along the lines of being saved by the prince, a true love's kiss, or, of course, a happily ever after. If I were to ask you how a story about a group of friends were to end, you'd say something like friendship and love, conquering all, and maybe defeating the enemy through teamwork and trust. You can notice the pattern here, that often we are told very similar stories, all of them showing very similar trends. And that even outside of children's television, we still see the adaptation of problem, climax, solution in virtually every consumable media out there. And so I see to it that we grew up in a world where the media has taught us to expect storybook lives. We may not always be conscious of it, but these things alter our perception because it creates expectation, idealism. We are born into this earth by ourselves, so we often wonder and navigate our path in life alone. And that's why we tend to gravitate towards the only guidance we have in how we can predict life to be. And obviously, the only way to do that is through the things we watch and read. Like, okay, I'll be honest. Coming of age films have convinced me that being the age of 16 to 20 is the absolute peak of your life. You know, meeting friends, meeting lovers, partying, the drama, the thrill. I was so ready to experience all of these things in high school. So ready for my own unique coming of age moment. I thought I was practically there. Because to paint you a picture of how almost picture perfect the past was, I was in a fixed class from 7th to 10th grade. Essentially, that means it was like a school sitcom with a recurring cast of characters. So I thought we were destined for a great ending, weren't we? Lo and behold, my disappointment when the pandemic canceled our prom, our graduation, the supposed end to junior high school, which was a big chapter in my life. My classmates, the family I basically grew up with. Our season finale just didn't happen. And I'm sure many of you know very well what I'm talking about. A lot of you probably had such a clear prediction of how your junior high school years were supposed to look like. How you would celebrate its end, how you would transition to senior high school. Hell, maybe you were already planning out your glow up and how you'll rebrand yourself with a new nickname, a new look. We strategize this detailed blueprint of our main character scenes, but when unpredictable things like the pandemic happen, we end up feeling robbed. We feel robbed of something greater. But it was a greatness that was never really guaranteed in the first place. I myself felt that disappointment the whole time I was stuck at home. I couldn't reconcile with the grief of the loss of time or my loss of experiences. It's because I built up my hopes so high for this specific part of my life that I couldn't prepare myself for anything but the one I envisioned. It was so bad to the point where I started obsessing over the past, regretting all those lost opportunities. Those opportunities are ones I could have easily taken advantage of before everything in my life became so limited. I grew to have this fixation of reversing time because I wanted to go back to a period where I believed life was still romanticizable, where I could still apply it to an overarching storyline. And I know that feeling can apply to anyone regardless of the context of the pandemic. You know, that grief and denial can also be present to those who hide their feelings for so long because they never expected someone else to steal their first love. Or to people who spend so much time focusing on academics because they never expected how hard it is to socialize and make friends outside of school. It can also apply to those who prioritize their freedom and independence from their parents because, well, they never expected a life without them. These situations where we continuously get misdirected by how unpredictable life is because of our own preconceived notions of what our future ought to look like. When life hits us with something unexpected, it shakes our reality because it was something we never thought of. It wasn't foreseeable due to the fact that we were so attached to an existing image. our existing image of what life would be a few moments from now. And that's what I mean when the media hardwired our ideals in life. And acknowledging this is essentially the first step in escaping its shackles. Because we're all so clueless. We're all just figuring out how things work by ourselves as we continue living. And so TV shows and movies are one of, if not the most accessible portrayals of life that can easily guide us as a result. The problem, however, is that they portray hardships as something to be glorified because the end result becomes worth it. It's because the end result becomes satisfying. What they don't show is the ugly truth, that actually life is just too unpredictable and they don't consider emotionally satisfying endings or relieving closure. That ultimately your hard work won't always result in what you wish it to be. And that's exactly the realization we need to come to for us to avoid the grief and regret that I mentioned earlier. Ironically, it's what I had to remind myself participating in this event. Because this speech that you're hearing right now obviously wasn't the initial draft, but it also wasn't the first version either. In my original speech, I was basically 80% done, writing it, revising it, memorizing it. I just needed to record it. But ultimately, life had another plan for me because it was just hitting me with one unpredictable thing and another. I messed up too many times, so I had to do so many takes. Suddenly, the battery is dying. I take a break and recharge. When finally I do get a good take, I look back at the footage and the recording automatically stopped because I reached the memory limit. Case in point, even with all my preparations and my vision of being utterly inspiring and profound, something went wrong, and I couldn't make that vision actually come to fruition. And the lesson I want people to take away from that situation is how easily it can shift based on the expectations I set on it initially. Like, yes, I could interpret that experience as me being a failure because I couldn't perfect it on the first try. But what if instead I didn't make my expectations based on what seemed to be a main character being triumphant in the end? Like, what if instead I told myself that this was the universe telling me that this speech wasn't my best, that I was being prevented from finishing because I could actually do better, that ultimately the events in the past was a sign for me and it just led me to improving, even if it wasn't immediate or, obvious in any way. I've learned through previous trials and tribulations that injecting our own definitions and injecting our own expectations makes us just much happier. Because instead of basing it on arbitrary standards made by idealistic TV shows, we make our own as we see fit. Like, if life has no reasoning for anything to happen because, there's no deliberate plot in the making, we can give meaning to events where it benefits us. Like, if you find it hard to legitimize your own expectations outside of what society tells you to, just remember the value of money. $1 is $1 because we put that meaning in the first place, right? A peso is a peso because we put that value there. But in the grand scheme of things, it's just merely paper. But currency value is just what we agreed for that paper to mean. In the same light, your failures can just mean exactly that. Failures. But because I can convince myself that this event or shortcoming can mean something else to me, then ultimately the meaning that I chose, that own meaning, still holds water. It's still true. How it is to us is all that matters. Because I set those expectations myself and not on what a director would, this outcome was just as meaningful had it been anything otherwise. To wrap up, I want to acknowledge that the whole cliche notion of making things your own and setting your own standards are not by any means new or profound conclusions. They're practically applicable to any internal problem in the modern world. But for some odd reason, we always seem to forget it. The point of my speech is for this to be the last reminder, that hopefully this will be the last time you'll need to hear a motivational talk about another version of the you can change things in your favor if you put your mind to it mentality. A common concept brought up in this stream of ideas is the growth mindset. It's a simple belief. It's about, how people are not born with inherent talents or skills. Instead, it's earned through hard work. But even if everyone understands that belief to a degree, it tends to be forgotten and isn't actually applied in daily life. Much like how we know that the media isn't charitable with how they display life or how they portray life, we still base our reality to theirs subconsciously. And so we shouldn't let our mind feed into making our lives worse because we involuntarily subject ourselves to higher, unattainable expectations. Just because we are the lone dictators of our lives doesn't mean we let the stories we see on TV be the ideology we are restricted by. We are the scriptwriters of our own lives. So we don't need to be controlled by what we think has already been laid out for us.